All right, we are live on the SoulBuffalo Earth Report. This is episode 7, and I am super excited to have my friend and colleague, Miss Dune Ives from Lonely Whale and Next Wave Plastics. Welcome aboard.
Thank you, Dave. It is nice to be on the Earth Report, reporting for duty.
We have to talk about the Earth and about the oceans and about all kinds of good stuff. I feel like we've been on live quite a bit these days. In lots of different conferences and forums, but I'm really excited to just dig up and have a conversation about everything that you're working on. Certainly a ton of intersection with what we're doing at the Ocean Plastic Leadership Network, but maybe first, I just realized today that you were a doctor, Dr. Dune Ives. I was tell us about that.
Yeah, I'm a psychologist by training, which I actually find comes in really handy no matter what sector I've ever worked in, because people tend to not be able to communicate with each other. So who better than a psychologist to get people to sit down at a table and have a conversation? Competitors, like-minded individuals who didn't know they needed to have a discussion. But yeah, I'm a trained psychologist.
I actually didn't know that. That's amazing.
A long time ago.
That's very helpful in the plastic space. Well, maybe it'd be great to just hear about Lonely Whale and Next Wave and sort of just what you're rooted in every day. And been following the work at Lonely Whale long before I knew you. But yeah, it'd be great to update everybody because there's so much good stuff going on.
Yeah, happy to. So this December, Lonely Whale officially turns 5 years old. And where we started as an organization is not entirely different to where we've ended up 5 years later, but we really started with an intent to bring people closer to the world's ocean, to really bond them with the ocean and ultimately with each other. We were founded on this great story of this real whale that's affectionately referred to as 52 Hertz, that swims the world's Pacific Ocean, presumably by itself, calling out for companionship. For whale males, we believe they call out for companionship, and everyone's hearing a call back because he sings at a frequency no other whale has been known to sing at before since he was discovered. And it's a really captivating story when you think about how hard we're making it for this whale to really survive, let alone thrive. And I think it's a story that we can all relate to, right? We all want connection. We're seeing it even more so now in a COVID-19 world. We crave connection. We crave to break free from our isolation. And ultimately, we all, and animals on this planet as well, really want to thrive as a species. So everything that we've done, from our campaign work to working with kids or corporations, has really been with the intent of, let's break down the barriers, the silos. Let's get people to communicate with each other, because that's the whale is teaching us. Communication is really important. Let's find ways to collaborate. And let's see if we can accelerate progress on improving ocean health. So our lens has always been plastic because it's the one thing that we can all really relate to every single day. But it is certainly not the only crisis that we have affecting the ocean today. And we need to do a lot more work across a lot more issues.
I think 5 years ago is when the turtle with the straw up his nose, I think it was 2015 when that first hit. And I mean, definitely people were talking about plastics in the ocean at that time. Mm-hmm. But that 100 million views and counting, I think, that are people that have seen that video. And that's right around the time. I feel like that, right when Lonely Whale was formed, was really right when everything just went through the roof, as far as the ocean plastics issue, just in the sort of global zeitgeist, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the very first time I learned about the plastic pollution crisis was when my dear friend David de Rothschild launched Plastiki, which a lot of folks might remember. This is Plastiki's 10-year anniversary. He created this boat out of recycled plastic bottles and then sailed from San Francisco to Australia. And it's an epic journey about our connection to the ocean and then plastic pollution. So that's when I first heard about it, but there was not a lot of data or information. So that turtle video is something that really it really pulled at the heartstrings. And then Dr. Jenna Jambeck's study, which I think came out in 2016, was the one that really, I think, lit everything on fire as well. Once you have data, it's really hard to turn away from an issue. A turtle is one thing, and we feel empathy with a turtle, and so it causes us to act. But then data drives decisions. And once you have data and more data, it's really difficult for you to turn away from an issue.
That's interesting. It's parallel journeys. So I've gotten to know Marcus Ericsson really well, and he did a a junk raft trip on, well, he called it junk raft, where he sailed from LA to Hawaii on plastic bottle raft. I think similar time. I know him and David know each other, and which was incredible. And I think he almost died a few times.
He's crazy.
And then I love Marcus. And then recently, this big report came out, the Breaking the Plastic Wave, that just put like a whole new set of data to like the timetables. Like everybody's been talking like we have to solve this issue by 2030, 2030, 2030. Like most of the big NGOs adopt that timetable. And now all of a sudden, Pew and Systemic put this report out that says there's no chance we're signing. Their data is that there's no chance we're going to be able to get to where we need to go, but we actually could reduce it by, get it to like 80% reduction by 2040. So it's like kind of like throwing everybody took a step back, and we were like, oh boy, this is just getting trickier as we go. And then you layer COVID on top of it. And
what's hard about the Pew report is that one, it's one of these, it's like a seal slapped you in the face and you're like, oh, okay, wait a minute. We're not doing enough. None of us are doing enough. No, for all the great announcements, for all the commitments that are out there, there's some massive holes in the supply chain that have to be addressed. So we're not doing enough, and we're not doing it quickly enough. And when I look at the Pew report, I say, okay, we can go from, let's just say for giggles, we're on the low end of the 8 to 12 million metric tons of new plastic entering the ocean every year. Let's just say, right? Like, let's let ourselves off the hook for a second. The Pew report is saying by 2040, we might be able to get down to 5 million metric tons of new plastic entering the ocean. Well, as a conservationist, I look at that and say, oh, that's way too many animals that are continuing to die. We lose hundreds of thousands of birds and turtles and whales and every single year. And quite frankly, Dave, we need every single one of those animals to keep our marine ecosystem resiliency, even where it is, try to keep it at stasis. But really the goal is to rebuild resiliency in the marine ecosystems. So all these issues are related. And that Pew report, that's pre-COVID-19 data, if I read the report correctly.
Oh, yeah, that's before.
That's before all the face masks. What is it, 129 billion face masks?
It's enough to cover Switzerland in a year.
Gloves. None of them are recyclable. And those are used monthly on a global basis.
And they look like jellyfish if they're in the water.
They look like jellyfish. Yeah. So it's getting worse. It's not getting better. So I think we fundamentally have to really rethink our business models and how we are showing up for the conversation. Are we doing enough? Don't let our bureaucracy within our organizations hold us back, right? How do we start to really leapfrog the situation? So maybe we can get 5 million metric tons of plastic entering the ocean every year. That seems crazy to me, Dave. That's like our new target.
Well,
right?
it's crazy to try to get these numbers to mean something. Like I think the Ocean Conservancy did a really good job with 8 million metric ton as a garbage truck worth of plastic into the ocean every minute, right? Or you got like the 4.2 metric tons, like with the World Wildlife Fund just put a report out, and I was just trying to figure out a way to like, all right, well, how can we make this real? And I think it's like 350,000 blue whales is 4.2 million metric tons, or they have like 93 aircraft carriers. But I mean, it's just a significant amount of plastic, and so much of it is so lightweight.
Well, let me give you a fun stat, because most of us can't relate to a blue whale, and a garbage truck doesn't seem like it's that big, right? So let me give you a fun stat to share. Sorry, I'm looking at my email right now because there is an email.
Fun stats are how it all becomes.
That I need to pull up. Okay, so when we think about our work, okay, my team is going to kill me right now because they're like, you have to be prepared for these things. Okay, so straws. So our straw campaign, really successful, right? Like we transitioned the entire city of Seattle away from single-use plastic straws and utensils, created some significant change and momentum. We have continued the straw campaign through a variety of ways, and our estimate right now is that we have stopped the equivalent of 149,760 Volkswagen bugs full of straws from entering the ocean. Like I can get my head wrapped around a Volkswagen bug. I can't get my head wrapped around a blue whale because I've never seen a blue whale. And then our next wave members, so our corporate work, which we can chat about as well, have already prevented 1,000 metric tons of plastic from entering the ocean, equivalent to 440,924 watermelons. It's a lot of watermelons.
That's a lot of watermelons that we should play. That we could play this game the entire interview.
The entire interview. I know. That's the thing, even with like plastic pollution. So it's so big, right? You say 29 million metric tons of new plastic entering the ocean starting in the year 2040. And from that point forward with a business as usual program, how do you know where to start? Like, what do you do with that? How does the average everyday person get involved? It's a big number and it's a gigantic problem.
Well, and how much of that number, where does that number need to be adjusted with the setbacks that we've had from COVID, right? We've been set back significantly, whether you're talking to activists or whether you're talking to industry. Waste management programs around the world, especially in the developing world, are like shutting down. They're not operating at full capacity. The plastic market is totally repressed, the secondary market, because oil's cheap, natural gas just never been cheaper. So these folks are out there that normally 15 million informal workers around the world that make a living from picking up what we would call trash and turning it in for profit, are picking up other materials in a lot of places. So I'd love to hear. I know you had some surprise COVID stats that you were going to tell me that I want to hear about, and also love to talk about Next Wave and the work that you guys are doing there, building supply chains in these places, which is really incredible work, where we intersect a lot, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, I guess a couple of thoughts that I'll put out there that, these stats are important. The 15 million waste pickers, these are real people. And they rely on a stable source of income. And I'm really proud of the Next Wave member companies that we work with. So we work with 11 corporations right now that have come together under the spirit of collaboration and transparency to build infrastructure. So to build essentially waste collection infrastructure in parts of the world where the plastic pollution crisis is the most acute. These are parts of the world that those 15 million workers come from. And by not only creating this infrastructure, but becoming a consistent buyer of the material, waste material, so what we consider to be a waste product today, these workers and their families can start to count on this revenue. They can start to count on this to fund their families and fund their communities. If it's education for kids, or if it's a community building that they need, or healthcare infrastructure, this is adding real jobs and real money and real stability and resiliency within these communities. So I'm so proud of our member companies, even during COVID-19, when so many of us have had to really take a look at where do we cut costs as much as we can. Some of these companies are doubling and tripling and quadrupling down. They're increasing their orders rather than staying where they were pre-COVID, because they want to be able to give these communities a lot of security. So that's something that we can all do. And I think we can all really drive change when we decide, when we have the intent to really solve for this issue and create stability and resiliency in the chain. But this is only a piece of the puzzle. So these aren't COVID stats. These are supply chain stats that I'm fascinated by right now. And at Lonely Well, what we've always kind of looked for is, where is there a gap in what we're talking about or what we're seeing or what we're thinking about that we can then put a big spotlight on and try to solve. So here's some stats that are really interesting to us these days. I'm going to look at my notes to get it right.
I'm going to write them down as you talk.
Okay. Approximately 100 billion plastic polybags are produced every year to store, transport, and protect garments, footwear, and accessories. This is known to a lot of the people in the fashion industry. But what's interesting is maybe somewhere between 1% and 5% of those are collected and recycled.
So these are like what your this shirt probably came at Nordstrom, so that it wouldn't get messed up on its way from wherever it was made, right?
Exactly right.
Immediately thrown away.
Exactly right. Exactly. And the other one that's interesting for us too is there approximately 125 billion plastic sandwich and storage bags are thrown out every year. And it's estimated that maybe 5 billion of those make their way into the ocean. I mean, a lot of these are estimates, but what I will say is that 180 billion plastic bags, polybags, 125 billion plastic sandwich and storage bags, 129 billion face masks, 65 billion gloves, and none of these are recycled today. And it's recycled, for those who are out there, it's not about just the collection. It's hard to collect these products and keep them in the waste stream, but it's even harder than to recycle them and do something with it. So, I hear a lot, Dave, about gosh, we can't wait to get back to normal. I actually don't want to get back to normal. I think normal is like so 1980s, right? It's not coming back. As much as I love Madonna and everybody else, like they're not coming back as they were in the 80s. Normal shouldn't be our goal. Our goal should be to get to a place where we understand our relationship to consumption and the impact that that's having on the planet. And we are all deciding, and by we all, it's not consumers, it's companies that make the products. It's companies that make the polymers that then contribute to the development of the products. It's policymakers. Like we have to do a whole heck of a lot more, and we need to redefine normal. That's what we're really interested in. How do we redefine normal and not go back to what it was pre-COVID?
It's fine. Tom Zaki last week on the show, Tom at TerraCycle, he's so brilliant. They just raised $20 million crowdfunding in a few months. I was totally, I knew it was going well, but somebody said to me, like, who's going to be the Elon Musk of packaging? And then the next day I read an article and it was like Tom Zaki, the Elon Musk of packaging. But they're recycling PPE there, and they have like an opportunity, but it's like, so much has to be able to like scale all this, like so much more has to happen. Right. And I mean, certainly recycling bags is really tricky. I mean, and you're right. But one of the key points that he dove in on is this consumption piece. I interviewed this guy named Josh Spodak, who's become a friend of mine, who's a pretty out there dude. And I
was on one of his podcasts. He's great.
He's great. He doesn't use anything. I mean, he had like a tiny little like tote bag full of stuff that was all the trash he's used for the entire year, and he tries to unplug his fridge as much as possible. But he
had me tracking my food waste for months. That was my task. I had to track my food waste, and we weighed it, the size of it, and what was going in there, and it was so fascinating.
What did you learn through that exercise?
I waste a lot of food. As a family, we think we're doing a really good job, but the reality is that, well, we don't anymore. I mean, that's one of the cool things about COVID. One of maybe the only cool things is that, man, we use everything. We use every single thing that we have. And I know that there are a lot more people out there like me who do that. But yeah, before COVID, it was remarkable how much we were putting into the compost bin.
Well, yeah, we have a pretty full compost bin as well where I am. This could be a pretty interesting sort of segue into your 6-month adventure where you're going to be very, Dune is going on an epic road trip. And you are absolutely going to be very much probably tracking your trash every step of the way on that adventure, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, we leave for 6 months this Sunday, and we're going to go all down the Western United States. We're going to hit as many national and state parks as we possibly can. So in addition to being a full-time head of Lonely Well, I'm a part-time, sometimes not great, first grade teacher's helper. And so my husband and I and our son were like, why do all this at home? Let's go see these places that are so important, and let's have a living laboratory. So we're really fortunate. Like, I'm grateful that we can do this. But you're right. So what's fascinating when you go on the road is that in this capacity we have to keep everything kind of contained, is you realize there are very few recycling options out there. And even when you can recycle, it's usually just paper and cardboard. So I live in this little bubble in Washington State where it feels like we can recycle everything. I can compost everything. But man, when I get outside my little bubble, I realize that that's not true. That's not the case.
Well, it's going to be like firsthand experience too. You're going to be in parts of the world where you're going to be forced to buy stuff that you don't want to buy probably sometimes. And then I'll probably have a lot of examples of places where you're blown away because you can do a lot more or buy a lot more stuff sustainably than you thought, right? It's going to, just like, I feel like you're just going like right into the lab of like where, the country that we live in. Is pretty cool.
And one of the things that's happened during COVID is the amount of disposables that we see to satisfy our takeout needs. And I'm so thrilled that our restaurants in some parts of the country have been able to open back up. So once a week, we go out and we get our to-go dinner, and lucky for us, they come in a compostable container. But a lot of places had to move back towards plastic, either because of the narrative around how plastic keeps you safer versus these reusables or compostables, but also, quite honestly, because of cost. And I think that's been one of the biggest awakenings for me in this space, is that there are so few alternatives out there that are cost effective for businesses to use. Really, the only thing you can use right now in some cases are single-use plastics. So it's a great, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, like I look at this and say, this is the most amazing opportunity on the planet, right? It's like an entrepreneurial or an innovator's big dream is to now start to innovate around the products that we need to create so that companies and individuals can really participate in being the solution rather than, being frustrated that all they have is something that can't be recycled, that has to be thrown out.
Yeah, it's a full spectrum, and like at each solution area, there's all these obstacles, right? Like John Warner, the father of green chemistry, we've gotten to know really well, and like been on with all these heads of R&D from like most of the big packaging companies, and they all want to use different types of materials, but to scale it and to have it compete on a price perspective, I mean, these companies that like sit in the plastic value chain are just so hyper competitive. And we're in an environment right now economically where people are buying stuff that costs less, and the stuff that costs less is most of the time coming in plastic. And it's such a tricky place to be, as well-intentioned as a lot of these like senior execs we work with are. In some cases, it's virtually impossible. And then how do you scale these new materials and build the manufacturing, the hundreds of millions of dollars that goes into like building these these places where they make all this? Like, so it's like first you got to find the right material that works and that works over time and do all the testing. And then you have to figure out how to manufacture it. And then you have to compete against the existing materials in the market. And it's really tricky. I mean, but I'm a believer that we're going to figure it out. And I mean, all the companies that are out there want to figure this out too. And I think we've come a long way. And can you, in the 5 years since Lonely Whale started, like how far do you feel like we've come, and how much further do you feel like we need to go?
Well, I think it depends on how you measure success. So 5 years ago, when we started the straw campaign, that's what most of the people know us for. I think you might be the only one, Dave. That isn't the first thing that comes to mind, is the straw campaign. But when we started with our straw campaign, we weren't the first straw campaign. There were like 20 others globally that we could identify. But the conversation, and we track at Lonely Well, we track the conversation over social media pretty closely around plastics and then specific types of plastics. And we look back in time and say, when we see a spike, can you hear my first grader? Sorry, everyone. This is life, right? Life in action.
A 4-year-old upstairs. She'll chime in too.
No, he'll come in at some point, I'm sure. So but we look back at inflection points and we say, okay, when there's been a spike in the conversation, either through search or on social media, we look back and we say, what caused that spike? What was the thing? And then did that spike actually it raised the bar, or the level of we call it the concentration of the discussion about plastic and social media. And so back in 2014, which is our baseline year, 2014, 2015, 2016, the conversation was flatlined. Nobody was talking about plastic pollution. No one at all. And now when you look at the conversation around plastic, it's somewhere like slightly above 50% concentration. So we all know about plastic pollution, right? We know it's an issue. We see it on the streets, around the ocean. You can barely go swimming without getting attacked by a chip bag. In my case, right. The most terrifying thing that ever happened to me is to get attacked by a chip bag while I'm off a coast. Will remain nameless. But so we were talking about it. And I think that's one of the biggest things that's changed, right? The awareness is high, and we're all trying to do our part. Individuals, NGOs, policymakers, corporations. I wouldn't say we're all. I do think that there is one particular actor within the supply chain that kind of needs to decide on a few different levels what its role is going to be to help protect the planet well into the future. So we're trying, right? We're building some successes. And from a behavior change standpoint, which is, and one of the areas that I kind of drive a little bit more at Lonely Well than others is that trying and early success is super important. And that will allow us to continue forward. What happened with COVID-19, though, is it was almost like a shock to the gut. All of a sudden now we're all sheltered in place. We're buying more shelf steady products, which are wrapped in plastic that can't be recycled. We now have an influx in PPE made from plastic. We also have, you mentioned already, the decline in the price of oil, the decline in our waste management collection and recycling infrastructure. And we also had, I think, a pretty horrible and false narrative around how COVID-19 potentially lingers on single-use plastics, which everything I've read just doesn't seem to be true. And so we also saw a push to try to roll back policies around banning single-use plastic bags and other items. And so that it felt like at the beginning, like it was a sock to the gut of all this progress that had been made for so many. And then it just felt like we were getting stepped back. The Pew report comes out, more commitments, more push. We're starting to see those bans stay in place. We're still not seeing the innovation that we need to see, that I would want to see to know that we're really making the progress that we can. But I got to say, Dave, that until we start having the conversation about the price of virgin plastic polymers versus recycled plastic polymers, I don't know that we're ever going to make the we need to. So that's a conversation starter that I think you and I should probably figure out, like, how do we have that discussion more? Because it's an upstream problem and it's a downstream problem. Those of us consumers, we're kind of in the middle. CPG companies even are kind of in the middle. FMCGs kind of in the middle. But it's really at that top, that way upstream, the development of these polymers and the price structure associated with those, that we really have to start thinking about if we're going to make progress.
Right. Well, because it's the price disparity. And I think this issue was made very well sort of documented by Andrew Forrest from the Minderoo Foundation, who's an Australian billionaire that put this huge initiative out last year. I think we were both at the UN sort of unveiling of that. And there's a TED Talk. So if anybody is interested in learning more about this idea of parity between virgin plastic and the recycled plastic market and sort of his plan, you can go check out Andrew Farr's TED Talk, which is a really good, I think, starting point for the conversation. Would you agree?
I think it's a really important part of the conversation. And I think that's a great first place to start. And, you know, what's so important to do is for us to support companies that have made a commitment to 100% recycled material in its products, 75 to 100%, whatever the ratio is they can get to. Those are the buyers for the recycled plastics. Once you have the buyers for the material, then it can happen. We can see that change start to take place, and utilization of less virgin plastic polymers for non-essential plastic items. I think it's really critical for us to support those companies, to give them props, to put a big, bright, shiny spotlight on them.
You want to give some props? Who are you thinking about? I have a few.
I have a call with one this afternoon. They'll remain. No, there's a few out there that are doing a really good job. I mean, it's I like the bold statements by some of the companies. You know, bold is where we need to go. But we have to be okay as end consumers that if it's going to cost a little bit more for us to keep buying something, but now it's in recycled content, or they've shifted, which is what I love to see too, they've shifted to a more sustainable material, then it's probably going to cost a little bit more. And that's the price of living on this planet.
That is a really good way to put it. And, you know, in closing, I feel like we super grateful for our partnership on so many fronts, Dune. And, you know, I feel like we're on the cusp, and I really am hopeful that this COVID setback actually like propels us forward and really like catalyzes. You know, there's a lot going on in the world right now between the election here, the social justice movement, the economy, the once in 100-year pandemic. I mean, it's crazy time to be alive, and all of those issues are extremely, extremely important, and certainly, you know, people are thinking a lot about them, but we can't forget about what's happening with the oceans or stop for a second. So I'm really hopeful, and, you know, with your help and so many of our partners at the Ocean Plastic Leadership Network, we just really want to like take a huge step forward, even though, yeah, we got step back. We don't know how far, but, you know, to use this, you know, obstacle is really just like the way forward, and just make some big things happen. So anyway, yeah, I just really appreciate you coming on today on the Earth Report.
Thank you. And I steal all your best lines.
Please. I
mean, but what you said is so critical, and I think, you know, just to leave this conversation with the thought that I'm a mom of a 6-year-old and a 29-year-old, and there are days that I wake up and it's hard to get out of bed, and I'm just being really honest. And I think for most of us, that's the case. Looking at the world we're leaving our kids with is really hard to face. And then there are days that I wake up, and I would say it's like 99% of the days, because I'm an eternal optimist, I wake up and I say, oh yeah, this is amazing. Like, when else are we going to be faced with so many issues coming at us at the same time? And what an opportunity, right? What an opportunity 50 years from now to look back at your kids and say, I was there. I made this decision. This is what I was able to contribute to. And I'm so proud 50 years from now that you have a livable planet. So that gets me excited every day. I think this is solvable. All these issues are. This one particularly is really solvable. And if we can solve the plastic pollution crisis, we can solve anything. So I'm excited. So Dave, let's do it.
Me too. I'm like totally fired up. I don't know who my next call, but they're going to get like a lot of energy and a positive mojo. So thank you so much, Dune. Thanks for everybody for checking out the Earth Report. We're back on Thursday, and have a great day, Dune. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Thanks.
Talk to you later.